and I am a future health and physical educator with a minor in adaptive physical education. So I found this quote on the bottom: if the bum is numb, the brain is the same. And I think that really just encompasses my philosophy as teaching, and just physical education as a whole. We want students to learn through movement and to develop that physical literacy while they're participating in the activities that help build skill development. So the first standard that I'm going to focus on today is learner differences. And this is in understanding individual and group differences among your students and utilizing a variety of teaching strategies to create an environment that meets the learning needs of all of your students. These could be physical needs such as differing ability levels or physical disabilities. They could also be different learning styles or cultural backgrounds of your students. Anything that differs the way that one student learns from another. The artifact that I'm going to use for Standard 2 is a journal reflection that I wrote in Special Education 330 when I was asked about differentiating instruction and assessment for my focus students. You can see, as bolded in my response, I replied, because all students learn differently, it is important that you as a teacher offer your instruction in a variety of ways. So I know under learning differences there's many different components that you could touch on, but I'm going to touch on differentiating your instruction for your different types of learners. I then went on to talk about students learning best from lectures or demonstrations and visuals, as well as the auditory learners and kinesthetic learners who need to complete the activity hands-on. So what I'm still working on in this standard is incorporating different learning styles in my classroom. I personally am a kinesthetic learner and I learn best from hands-on, so I find myself developing activities that are hands-on and just get them right into gameplay and doing the activity. But I realize that a lot of my learners are going to be auditory and visual learners, and I need to provide opportunities that help meet their learning needs by providing pictures, videos, visual demonstrations. The second thing that I'm still working on is thinking critically about how I'm making modifications for my students of all ability levels. I have not yet had to work with a student with disabilities in my classroom, so these are some things that I kind of skim over and just say, here are some hypothetical modifications. But I need to start thinking intentionally about how I am incorporating those learners in my classroom so that they can be successful. So what I'm going to do about it, the first one is all my future lesson plans. I want to place a large emphasis on making those modifications for my learners with unique characteristics and thinking intentionally about how I'm going to incorporate them in my classroom so that they can find success and they can participate. I also will attend professional development conferences, whether this is the SHAPE conference or WHPE conference, but seeking out those sessions that talk about making modifications for your students and addressing a wide variety of teaching strategies and learning styles. The second standard that I'm going to focus on today is Standard 3, which is learning environment. So the teacher works to create a learning environment that is motivating, encouraging, structured, and promotes student learning. The learning environment in which you create your classroom is critical to the success of your students. So for my artifact, I wrote a classroom management paper in TED 211, which is child psychology for elementary students. The different components of this classroom management paper included motivation, routines, classroom cueing, parent communication, and rules and consequences. And these are all really important components of your learning environment that you establish for your students. Motivation is how you're motivating students to participate in the content that you're teaching them. Routines, how students know exactly what's expected of them every day and how to move about their day in the classroom. Classroom cueing is how you're signaling students. Parent communication, how you're involving the families outside of your classroom so that the learning doesn't stop when students leave your classroom. And then rules and consequences, how you're how you're monitoring the routines that you establish to your maintaining the participation in your classroom. So I'm going to focus on routines specifically. So this was the part of the paper that I wrote about routines. So the quote is, because of this, it is important for students to know the routines. The routines should be demonstrated by the teacher and then practiced by the students. When you really focus on the rules and routines during the first 2 months, it sets you up for a successful year. So routines are critical to the success of students in your classroom. It's how they're entering your classroom, how they're moving about your classroom, how they're exiting your classroom. And the importance of demonstrating and practicing those routines with your students in the beginning so they know right off the bat what's expected of them and how they're going to behave in your classroom. And then focusing on those in the beginning of the year, because then that's going to be your foundation throughout the rest of the year. So what I'm still working on in this standard is an application to a PE setting. I wrote this when I was still an elementary education major. So I want to shift it so that it is in the physical education setting for that certain time that you have students throughout the day. I also need to focus on rules and consequences. This is not something that I'm very familiar or very comfortable with, is developing those rules and those expectations of students in your classroom, and then how you're going to follow through with those rules. One thing I liked is what I learned from a professional named Randy Springs, is he came up with commitments instead of rules, and so how students are committed to each other and committed to their learning and committed to you as their teacher. I'm also working on developing activities that are engaging and motivating. Oftentimes I focus on content and skill development, and I lose that fun factor of how I'm engaging students in the content and in their learning and motivating them so they're eager to participate. So what I'm going to do about it, placing a large emphasis on classroom management in my future lesson plans. I know that both of your guys' outlines provide opportunities for safety protocols and ASAP activities, so how students are getting active right away and entering the classroom. So I want to take a moment about every lesson plan to think about how I'm going to implement those into my classroom and putting more of an emphasis on them instead of just skimming over them as if they were hypothetical. The second, working with and learning from my cooperating teacher during student teaching, not just my cooperating teacher, but also other professionals in the building, how they are implementing routines into their classroom, how their learning environment is set up, and what rules and expectations they have for their students, and then how they follow through with those rules and expectations. And again, professional development and working with other professionals, such as at WHPE or Shape America Conference, and those sessions on motivating students and engaging them in the content, rules and consequences, and then routines. So the third and final standard is the application of content. So this is the teacher integrates learning experiences in which students make meaning of and apply content in their own lives and authentic experiences. So this is where students take the content that they are learning and apply it to their own lives. And this makes the content so much more meaningful, because then they can go and apply it outside of the classroom to the decisions that they are making related to health. My artifact for this is from Health 467, in which I wrote a nutrition lesson plan. So this was on day 2, and as you can see, the central focus was students will be analyzing their own daily diet through a 24-hour nutrition log, as well as a nutrition inventory. They will then identify one area of weakness in their nutrition and write one SMART goal that addresses that weakness. So students were taking the content and the concepts they learned on day 1, and then applying them to their own diet and reflecting on their own eating habits, which made it more meaningful for students because then they had evidence from their own lives on what they need to do better and what they're already doing very well. And then writing one SMART goal gave them the skills to know how to do better. Instead of just saying, you need to eat more vegetables, they wrote a SMART goal that helped them reach that goal and helped give them the steps for success. So what I'm still working on, again, this was in health, so I'm working on applying it to a PE context in which students are taking the content that we're teaching them in physical activity or physical education and applying it outside of physical education. So they're not just playing basketball to play basketball, learning the skills of dribbling and shooting, but then they're learning those skills so they can go outside and engage family members or friends in physical activity, which promotes physical literacy for a whole lifetime. The second is incorporating questioning and challenging. I am a direct style teacher. I like to give students the content and then send them to a practice task to practice it. I struggle to give up the control and provide questioning and challenging, so students are provided with more of a guided discovery opportunity in which they enhance their critical thinking skills. So what I'm going to do about it, developing lesson plans that give more autonomy to students when appropriate. So again, helping students develop those critical thinking skills so that when they are in a game situation, they can analyze it and make a decision on their own. And when they get outside of our physical education setting, they know how to self-manage their own learning, and they know how to self-manage their own play, and they can, again, promotes physical activity outside of classroom. And then once again, professional development, Shape America and WHPE, seeking out those sessions that help more of a guided discovery and help me with challenging and questioning students so that I can guide them towards the correct answer, not just throwing random questions out there and letting them sink or swim, but help engage them in the content through questions. So closure, I understand that my learning is a work in progress, and I'm thankful for this opportunity to reflect on what I've done in the past to help guide what I'm going to do in the future. So thank you for listening.
Okay, when looking at learner differences, artifacts showed that you understand the reason why learner differences are really important. And you briefly stated, like within that reflection statement, on how you would apply learner differences, but could you give me some specific examples of how you might accommodate the needs of a variety of students within physical education? So what might it look like for your unique learners or your different ability levels?
So we have inter-task variation, so which you can make an activity more challenging for some students or make modifications such as equipment or the task itself. If you're overhand throwing, back them up to make it more challenging so they have to throw for a farther distance, or moving them closer to the target so that it's easier for them to find success.
Good. How about English language learners? Talk to me about those students and what you envision for some modifications or adaptations or...
Yes. So I actually studied Spanish for 7 years. So that is something that I'm going to incorporate in my classroom, even if I don't have ELL students. But just having focus words in Spanish so that those students feel represented in the language that you're using in the class. And then it also helps provide cultural diversity within your classroom. The other students are learning a little bit about a different language in your class, but then it also helps those ELL students understand the content more when it's in their native language.
In your TED 211 classroom management paper, you talked about how you might provide routines for students in order to improve classroom management. What might a routine look like in physical education?
A really important routine is the entrance protocol, how students are entering and getting into activity right away so that they're not waiting around for their other classmates and that they don't know what's expected. So an entrance protocol could be having the instructions up on the board for students and having the activity set up so they come right into your classroom, begin the activity, and then that provides you as the teacher some time to gather everything and get prepared for the activity while students are engaged and moving.
Good. What about the learning environment in a health classroom? So let's say you're in a mental and emotional health unit. Talk to me about some considerations in a typical classroom health, specifically a mental and emotional health unit.
Yeah, so depending on what you did the day before, you could have an activity set up so students were reflecting or reviewing on the day before. You could review core concepts, or you could have them reflecting on something, some homework assignment that you gave them the day before, such as trying a new stress management strategy, so that students are engaging in the content right away, and that doesn't require a lot. So you could have the instructions up on the board again for students to come in and begin the activity.
What might be some reasons why? You gave an example of, teaching students to play basketball. It's not just about dribbling the basketball. What other connections could you make for students for them to apply the idea of, or the skill of, dribbling a basketball?
Definitely. It improves hand-eye coordination, so students can then just build that skill in itself and then transfer it to other skills that they're going to be learning in PE. So not just the skill of dribbling, but just that fine hand-eye coordination.